earthquake hits Afghanistan days after tremors killed thousands. Resilient global economy limping along with growing divergences. Good afternoon and Salam Malaysia Madani. This is World Today. I'm Brendan Lepal. A magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck western Afghanistan early today, hitting an area where more than 2,000 people were killed after a series of similar tremors on the weekend. The quake occurred at a shallow depth at around 5:10 a.m. local time, with its epicenter about 29 kilometers north of the city of Herat. Volunteers and rescuers have been working since Saturday in what are now last-ditch attempts to find survivors from the earlier series of earthquakes, which leveled entire villages and affected more than 12,000 people. Local and national officials have given conflicting counts of the number of dead and injured from the previous earthquakes, but the Afghan Disaster Ministry has reported 2,053 casualties so far. There were no immediate reports of new casualties after today's quake, which hit near Herat city, home to more than 500,000 people. The earlier earthquakes completely destroyed at least 11 villages in Herat province's Zenda Jan district. Local media reported that many Herat residents had been spending their nights living in tents in the open air due to a fear of aftershocks following the weekend tremors. Hurricane Lydia made landfall on Mexico's Pacific coast as an extremely dangerous Category 4 storm, bringing strong winds and heavy rain, threatening to bring flooding and mudslides. The U.S. National Hurricane Center, NHC, said Lydia was packing maximum sustained winds of around 220 kilometers per hour, and additional strengthening was possible before it makes landfall in the country. According to the center, it intensified to a Category 4 hurricane, the second highest on the 5-step Saffir-Simpson scale. It was expected to bring rainfall of up to 30 centimeters to Nayarit, Sinaloa, and Jalisco states. These rains will likely produce flash and urban flooding, along with possible mudslides in areas of higher terrain near the coast. In the seaside city of Puerto Vallarta, a popular destination for Mexican and foreign visitors, shopkeepers boarded up windows and piled up sandbags in case of flooding. School classes were suspended in some areas and residents were urged to take shelter. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said civil protection personnel were on alert and around 6,000 members of the armed forces had been deployed to help residents. Hurricanes hit Mexico every year on both its Pacific and Atlantic coasts, usually between May and November. More than 27,000 people in Bago, southern Myanmar, have been taking shelter in 47 relief camps as of Tuesday evening due to floods triggered by the surging river level. According to the country's Department of Meteorology and Hydrology, the water level of Bago River in Bago has been above its danger level since Sunday. The Weather Bureau said the water level of Bago River in Bago City on Tuesday was about 4 feet above its danger level, adding that it is expected to decrease about 6 inches in one day. A railway official said the rail trips running through Bago region have been suspended since Sunday. The rainy season typically brings months of heavy downpours to the Southeast Asian country, but scientists say man-made climate change is making weather patterns more intense. Israel said it recaptured Gaza border areas from Hamas yesterday, the fourth day of fierce fighting that has left thousands dead on both sides. Fears of a regional conflagration has surged ahead of an expected Israeli ground incursion into Gaza, the crowded, impoverished enclave. The Israeli army has called up 300,000 reservists and mass tanks and other heavy armor both near Gaza and on the northern border with Lebanon, where exchanges of fire continued. The military said its forces had largely reclaimed the embattled south and the border around Gaza and dislodged holdout Hamas fighters from more than a dozen towns and kibbutzim. At the same time, fear and chaos reigned among the 2.3 million Palestinians living in the coastal territory that has been hammered by thousands of Israeli munitions. Media unions and officials revealed that 4 Palestinian journalists were also killed in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza City. Explosion again shook Gaza City last night. Earlier, for the third time in 24 hours, an Israeli airstrike hit Gaza's Rafah border, crossing with Egypt. Israel on Monday imposed a total siege on Gaza, which it has already blockaded for years, cutting off the water supply, food, electricity, and other essential supplies. European Union foreign ministers urged Israel not to cut such essentials and called for humanitarian corridors for those trying to flee. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk said such sieges are prohibited under international humanitarian law. Doctors and nurses at Gaza's overwhelmed Al-Shifa hospital were busy treating hundreds of casualties from Israeli air raids as the Palestinian Health Ministry warned of a catastrophic situation. Emergency room doctor Mohammed Ghanim told the media that the medical teams had dealt with large numbers of casualties, most of them women and children, arriving at the same time. Ghanim said medical supplies, including oxygen tanks, were running low in the blockaded coastal enclave as they face electricity and water crisis. The doctor was interrupted by the arrival of a new group of wounded, 3 women, 2 children, and an elderly man and 2 young men who were admitted to the emergency room. Nearby, a staff member was comforting Rama al-Hassasneh, who was lying on a hospital bed next to her 4 children, aged 3 to 6, all wounded in an Israeli airstrike that hit their Gaza City neighborhood of Sheikh Ridwan. The Gaza Health Ministry has said that at least 765 people have been killed and 4,000 wounded by Israeli strikes since Saturday. The Health Ministry warned that a shortage of medical supplies and medications would lead to a catastrophic situation in the Gaza Strip. The ministry said 8 hospitals were not sufficient to meet the needs of the Gaza Strip, which has a population of 2.3 million. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the U.S. is trying to monopolize the settlement of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Speaking during a meeting with Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammad Shia al-Sudani in Moscow, Putin also said Russia and Iraq's position is that damage to the civilian population must be minimized and reduced to zero.
Которые пытались монополизировать урегулирование, но, к сожалению, не были озабочены поиском компромиссов, приемлемых для обеих сторон, а наоборот, выдвигая свои собственные представления о том, как это должно быть сделано, оказывали.
Adding to that, Iraqi Prime Minister added that this is a natural result of the years of crimes and violations committed by the Israeli occupation in the face of international silence.
успешно.
هناك تصعيد واضح خلال هذه الأيام وتصعيد خطير يستهدف المدنيين الأبرياء بقصف عشوائي مدمر ممنهج وبكلام واضح وصريح بتدمير غزة وجعلها خربة.
The UN General Assembly has rejected a bid by Russia to regain a seat on the Human Rights Council, from which it was ousted after invading Ukraine. Russia, which was competing with Bulgaria and Albania for 2 open spots allocated to the region, received 83 votes in its favor from the UN General Assembly's 193 members. Albania received 123 votes, while Bulgaria received 160. The Human Rights Council's 47 members are allocated by region, and each large regional group usually pre-selects its own candidates, which the General Assembly then typically approves. But this year, 2 groups had more candidates than available seats. In Latin America, Brazil, Cuba, the Dominican Republic and Peru were vying for 3 seats, and in Eastern Europe, Albania, Bulgaria and Russia sought 2 seats. The vote takes place by secret ballot, testing Russia's contention that it has private support in developing countries wary of the West's billions of dollars in support to Ukraine. In April 2022, 93 countries voted to suspend Russia from the Council, while 24 opposed that punishment. That vote against Russia was less lopsided than other resolutions defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which drew approval from around 140 countries. A subsea gas pipeline and a telecommunications cable connecting Finland and Estonia under the Baltic Sea have been damaged in what may have been a deliberate act. The Finnish government cautioned against leaping to any conclusion, saying it seemed unlikely that explosives were the cause. Finnish President Sauli Niinistö said he had been in touch with NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg and that the military alliance was ready to assist in the investigation. He said the cause of the damage was not yet clear and that Finland and Estonia were cooperating in an ongoing investigation. Estonian officials confirmed that underwater telecommunications lines linking to Finland were also damaged. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo said that a preliminary assessment suggested that the discovered damage could not have been caused by normal use of the pipeline or pressure fluctuations. When asked about the likelihood of Russian involvement, Orpo said it was important to gather all the information that is available and not to jump to conclusions at this stage. In a related development, the Norwegian Seismological Institute, NOSA, announced that it detected a probable blast Saturday night in the Baltic Sea between Finland and Estonia, where the gas pipeline leak was later detected. Baltic Connector pipeline operations were interrupted on Sunday due to the leak, rendering countries the last gas pipeline inoperable after Russian imports were halted following its invasion of Ukraine. Head of the investigation department at the National Bureau of Investigation, Timo Kilpalainen, said there was no indications that explosives were used in the act. The incident comes a year after the Nord Stream pipelines, a major conduit for Russian natural gas exports to Western Europe, were hit by a series of underwater blasts. According to NOSA, the magnitude of the recent incidents were much lower than the Nord Stream explosion in September last year. NOSA said the origin of the blast is estimated to be 20 kilometers north of Paldiski, Estonia, adding that the location and magnitude remains associated with large uncertainties. And still ahead, US promises to work with China after car hits consulate. Stay with us. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, kept its 2023 global growth forecast unchanged but warned that the economy is limping along as inflation remains high. The IMF's updated World Economic Outlook still sees growth of 3% for this year, but it cut its forecast for 2024 to 2.9%, down 0.1 percentage points from its July report.
The global economy continues to recover from the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, showing remarkable resilience, yet growth remains slow and uneven. The global economy is limping along, not sprinting. Under our baseline forecast, growth will slow from 3.5% last year to 3% this year and 2.9% next year, a 0.1 percentage point downgrade for 2024. This remains well below historical averages. Important divergences are appearing.
Inflation, which has fallen sharply since last year, is predicted to remain elevated at 6.9% this year, up slightly from July, and 5.8% in 2024, up 0.6 percentage points. Central banks have raised interest rates sharply in efforts to contain inflation. The move could have knocked on efforts on growth. But the IMF warned central banks against easing the monetary tightening too soon, adding that it still expects the global economy to have a soft landing, a slowdown that avoids recession. Meanwhile, the IMF also revealed that the outlooks for China and Germany were downgraded. It said China's outlook for the next 2 years was lowered under the weight of a real estate crisis threatening the world's second biggest economy. The Chinese economy is now expected to grow by 5% this year, down from 5.2% previously, and slow further to 4.2% in 2024, down from 4.5%. The IMF said the Chinese authorities need to take very forceful and very sizable action to really bring back confidence in the property sector. The picture is also gloomy in Germany, with the IMF seeing a deeper recession in Europe's biggest economy, the only G7 country to have a contraction. The German economy is expected to shrink by 0.5% this year, instead of 0.3% previously, and grow by 0.9% in 2024 instead of 1.3%. The wider Eurozone is forecast to grow by just 0.7% this year, down 0.2 percentage points from July, and by a reduced 1.2% in 2024. The IMF noted that the Eurozone was hit harder than the United States by the rise in energy prices following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the region is an importer. The US dollar broke through the symbolic 1,000 peso mark on Argentina's parallel market as citizens scrambled to dump the currency 2 weeks before a presidential election. Argentines are heading to the votes with annual inflation at over 120% and record poverty levels as the South American nation grapples with how to emerge from decades of economic malaise. The dollar has long been a safe haven from the peso, with people buying the currency whenever they can as a form of savings and protection from their currency's volatility. However, with strict restrictions on access to dollars, the blue dollar, a thriving black market exchange tool, is how most get their hands on the greenback. With the parallel dollar now trading at over 1,000 pesos, it is worth almost 3 times the official rate of 365 pesos, propped up at great costs by the government. Uncertainty is high ahead of the vote, and frontrunner Javier Milei, a radical outsider who has vowed to dollarize the economy, urged the people to steer away from investments in pesos. Since 2015, Argentina has imposed strict restrictions on the purchase of foreign currency as the central bank's reserves plummeted. The United States promised to cooperate with China and condemned violence against diplomatic missions after a car crashed into Beijing's consulate in San Francisco. Police in a California city shot dead the driver after the vehicle crashed on Monday into the consulate's visa office. The State Department said it was in touch with its counterparts in China, which had said it made solemn representations to Washington and urged serious punishment over the attack. A State Department spokesperson said the U.S. is committed to addressing this issue, consistent with its obligations under the Vienna Convention relating to safety and security of diplomatic facilities and personnel. The spokesperson said the U.S. condemns all violence perpetrated against foreign diplomatic staff working in the country. San Francisco is home to a large number of ethnic Chinese residents, many of them critical of Beijing. Violence against diplomatic missions is rare in the United States, but the Cuban embassy in Washington has been attacked twice in recent years, most recently by a person who last month threw 2 Molotov cocktails. France has begun withdrawing troops from Niger after being ordered out by coup leaders as the United States cut off more than $500 million in assistance to the insurgency-hit Sahel nation. Washington declared that Niger's military had staged a coup on 26 July, overthrowing a democratic government seen as a key bulwark against Russia. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said any resumption of U.S. assistance will require action to usher in democratic governance in a quick and credible timeframe. The United States, along with West African nations and former colonial power France, had been pressing the military to restore President Mohamed Bazoum. Around 1,000 French troops were stationed in capital Niamey, with another 400 deployed at 2 forward bases in the northwest, near Mali and Burkina Faso. a hotbed of insurgent activity. The French army move kicks off a complex and fraught process that Paris expects to be completed by the end of the year. The withdrawal was expected to cause logistical headaches for the French, with few safe routes out of the region. Niger's land borders with Benin and Nigeria have been closed since the coup, while Niamey forbids French flights over its territory. Liberians voted yesterday on whether to give football legend George Weah a second term as president, with peace among voters means concern in a nation still scarred by back-to-back civil wars. Even before polling stations open at about 0800 GMT, hundreds of people had gathered in the early morning sunshine, waiting to vote in the capital, Monrovia. By mid-morning, as polling stations' queues remain long, President Weah cast his ballot in the Monrovia suburb of Painesville. The main political parties have pledged that the presidential and legislative elections in the West African country will pass off peacefully. The election is the first to be held since the United Nations ended its peacekeeping mission in Liberia in 2018. The mission was created after more than 250,000 people died in two civil wars between 1989 and 2003. Weah, 57, entered politics after a career as an international footballer, which saw him become the first and only African to win football's most prestigious individual award, the Ballon d'Or, in 1995. He is the favorite against 19 rivals for the presidency, but could face a second-round runoff in early November, unless a candidate secures an unlikely absolute majority in the first round. Madagascar's outgoing president, Andry Rajoelina, launched his re-election campaign, promising an orange wave to thousands of supporters wearing his party colour who gathered in the capital, Antananarivo. Voters in the Indian Ocean island nation will elect a president on 9th November, but the run-up to the poll has been marred by tensions after disputes over its regularity. For more than a week, opposition parties have held demonstrations against what they call an institutional coup to keep Rajoelina in power that have routinely been dispersed by police. Rajoelina, 49, resigned last month in line with the constitution in order to run for re-election. The president of the Senate, Heri Manana Razafi Mahefa, was supposed to take over but declined for personal reasons, leaving the task to a collegial government headed by the Prime Minister and ally of Rajoelina. The move was accepted by the country's top court, which also dismissed appeals to have Rajoelina's candidacy declared void over his dual French nationality, sparking the anger of the opposition. And next in sports, roaring Shelton fights back to reach Shanghai last 8. Stay with us. US Open semi-finalist Ben Shelton fought back from a set down to defeat Jannik Sinner yesterday and reached the Shanghai Masters last 8 in one of the biggest victories of his young career. The 19 seed emerged from an excruciatingly tight deciding set to battle through 2-6, 6-3, 7-6 and will face fellow American Sebastian Korda in the quarterfinals. Shelton, who turned 21 on Monday, endured a torrid opening set against the informed 6th seed Sinner, summed up his double fault to concede the 7th game of an error-strewn first stanza. The Italian Sinner, fresh from winning the China Open in Beijing, clinched the opening set with a well-played smash. The athletic Shelton was a changed man in the second, sealing the set with an ace and a roar, and then immediately put Sinner under the cosh to start the decider. The 22-year-old Sinner survived the initial onslaught, saving 5 break points to seal a game that lasted nearly 10 minutes, and the set went with serve to force the tiebreak. But it was Shelton who prevailed, and a crowd that had been on his side serenaded him by singing "Happy Birthday." And in football, the UEFA has announced that the United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland will co-host Euro 2028, while Italy and Turkey will be joint hosts of the 2032 tournament. Both bids ran unopposed but still needed official approval from European football's governing body, which they received at a meeting in Switzerland. Turkey last week withdrew from the bidding process for Euro 2028, clearing the path for Britain and Ireland, who shelved plans to bid to host the 2030 World Cup to focus on staging the European Championship. FIFA last week announced that Morocco, Portugal and Spain will stage the 2030 World Cup, but games will also be played in Uruguay, Argentina and Paraguay. As the footballing showpiece celebrates its centenary, Saudi Arabia subsequently revealed its plans to bid to host the 2034 World Cup. 6 of the proposed venues for the 2028 tournament are in England, with 2 stadiums in London and others in Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle and Birmingham. Belfast, Dublin, Glasgow and Cardiff are also in line for matches. Italy hosted matches in Rome at Euro 2020, but has not hosted a tournament on its own since the 1990 World Cup. Turkey, which hosted this year's Champions League final in Istanbul in June, has never been awarded a major international competition. The next Euro will be played in Germany next year from 14 June to 14 July. Meanwhile, Turkey said it cherished the chance to co-host the Euro 2032 tournament with what it called friendly country, Italy.
And the host
Predominantly Muslim Turkey this year celebrates the centenary of its formation as a secular post-Ottoman republic. Italy and Turkey ran unopposed for the joint rights to host the 2032 tournament. Turkey has repeatedly tried and failed to host Europe's main international football tournament. Its joint bid with Greece to co-host Euro 2008 lost out to Austria and Switzerland. It tried again to host the Euro 2012 and Euro 2016, losing out to a joint Ukraine-France candidacy and then France. But after 4 failed attempts and having joined forces with Italy, the lack of any rival contenders means Turkey will now get its chance. The Turkish Football Federation also expressed its gratitude to UEFA and promised to offer spectators the ultimate European Championship experience. In motorsport, Aston Martin driver Lance Stroll is being investigated by Formula One's governing body for possible rules breaches at last weekend's Qatar Grand Prix. An FIA spokesman said the governing body's compliance officer was in discussion with the Canadian in relation to several incidents that may have contravened FIA rules, policies and procedures. No details, however, were given about the incidents. Stroll, son of team owner Lawrence, failed to progress beyond the first phase of qualifying and was seen throwing his steering wheel out of the car in the garage and shoving his trainer, Henry Howe. Howe was trying to direct Stroll to the FIA garage for a mandatory weigh-in, with drivers obliged to go via the pit lane rather than the paddock. Of that incident, Stroll said that he and Howe are in good terms, adding that they go through the frustration together. After the race, he also criticized penalties he received for track limits violations and was outspoken about the extreme weather conditions. And that wraps up World Today. In our top story, new earthquake hits Afghanistan days after tremors killed thousands. Tune in to Malaysia Tonight, coming up at 8:30 p.m. on TV1 and saluran Berita RTM. Till then, I'm Brandon Paul. Thank you for watching. Malaysia Madani, tekap perpaduan penuhi harapan. Take care.